Hey everybody, this is Mike from Feedline Labs. Hey, it's late Sunday night. Um, I thought I'd make this video for everybody, especially those that joined the beta last night and were reporting repeaters all over the place. It was actually pretty impressive. I was pretty happy with the way things worked out. So the AirPulse Desktop, that was really just my test harness I was writing to prove this whole concept would work. And then I just decided, why not release that, right? Get some miles on this, get some testing in, see if it really works for other people. And it worked pretty well. We found some issues and fixed some things really quickly, but it's working pretty well. So let's go over the settings. The first thing you'll see is the device name. That you can change. So I'm going to change this to Mike's AP. That's Mike's AirPulse, right? Now, the reason why it has a name is because you can say show on map. The show on map is on by default, and it's going to use your lat long, but it's going to adjust that. It's going to put that about 3 to 5 miles away from your actual location here. So it's not going to be like sitting right on top of your location. It'll be far enough away where it doesn't even matter. And then, of course, you have this choice here, RTL-SDR. That fits most of what people are using, but we're going to be adding AirSpy here in about a week or so. And then range in miles, I would leave that at 200 always. That really doesn't matter so much. It's really how many repeaters do you want. I think it ships with 60, and I've been running with 80. And we're going to look at these buttons along the bottom in a little bit. Let's go on to scanner. These times you're going to look at on the left here, well, at least these additional ones, they're in milliseconds. So what are milliseconds? 1,000 milliseconds is a second. So we've only got 40 milliseconds here, which you can see is a tiny little slice of time. This settle delay is, we're in a loop. We've downloaded your repeaters and we're scanning them. We set the SDR tuner to your output frequency of the repeater, and then we sit there for 40 milliseconds and just let the SDR settle down. And then we're going to read for 150 milliseconds after that expires. So we're going to wait 40 milliseconds, sample the signal we're getting for 150 milliseconds. Now, actually, I'm running at 50, and I'll tell you what I did. I basically looked at those calibration logs that run at the beginning, and I saved them off, right? And then I kept cutting this time down and looking at what does my calibration look like versus what it did at 150. And it was still really good, almost no difference. The numbers change, randomly based on what's going on in the environment anyway. But, as far as big jumps, almost nothing. And I figured 50 was good enough. It makes my scan much quicker, but I wouldn't go lower than that. It could make your SDR hotter. See the reset scanner defaults? Watch the 50 there. If I hit that, I'm going to click it. It went to 150. So you can play with these settings all you want and then hit reset, and it'll be back to what it was when you initially installed it. Delay between scan loops. This is kind of obvious. We're going to loop through all, X number of repeaters, in my case 80. And we're going to get to the bottom of that loop, and we're going to say, okay, let's wait this many milliseconds, and this is 2,000, and 1,000 is a second, so we're going to wait two seconds. And this is kind of a cool down period for your SDR. I wouldn't cut that down any more than that. It seems to work really well. You can even put a little delay in between each tuning. I haven't found that was really useful. On the calibration settings, you can have 1 to 5. Now, if you're playing with settings, you want to see how it works, you can cut this down to 1 and get through that part real quick. I do that sometimes. I typically leave it at 3. What that calibration does is it scans through all your repeaters and it samples them all, and it's looking for a baseline. Really what we're looking for is what does it sound like when it's quiet, right? Now, if somebody's talking on there when these calibration loops run, don't worry, because on every scan, even after the calibration is done, we're going to keep averaging the new signal downward. So even if it was running at 18 in about 5 or 6 scans, it's going to be back down to almost its baseline. It's kind of self-healing, so to speak. And that's it. Let's go to the detection. This is super important. This is what we use to determine that a repeater is indeed active and somebody's talking on there. So let's start here, because this is the weird thing. This usually trips people up. The minimum reportable SNR value we're going to report at is 12, meaning let's say that we have a perfect repeater that's silent mode is 0. If you get a 10, which is, we're going to talk about that in a minute, we still don't report that. If it goes from 0 to 10, we don't report that as a hit. It has to be over 12. We don't want to report noise. Our methodology is we would rather have missed activity than report bogus activity, so that when you look at our map and you're looking at our statistics, it's all real. Let's look at the activity delta. That's 10. So you have your baseline, let's say it's 0, and in this case, let's say the repeater's baseline is 3, and now we get a 13. Well, we take 3 from 13 and we get 10, and we say, is that higher than 12? Yes, because the original signal was 13. So we're going to report that activity. Now, if it wasn't higher, but it was between 8 and that, we would report that as a near miss, but only on the log you'll see that as a near miss. We don't report that up to the gray line fabric, but it just helps you determine things, and we'll talk about that later. The report cooldown, the 60 seconds is way too long. When we ship our next version, we're probably going to make that 20. What this does is it says, hey, it's only been 10 seconds since we reported this repeater active, because we're on a new scan loop, and yep, there's we're still getting a signal on there. Well, we don't really need to report that up to the gray line fabric, because once you report a repeater is active, it stays active for 5 minutes. So that's what that does. Let's look at the schedule. Also, it's going to run by default from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. You can turn that off and just run 24 hours a day. I wouldn't do that on your SDR. Let's look at the advanced stuff. The benchmark frequency. You've probably seen that, or maybe you didn't notice. At the beginning of each calibration loop, we inject a value, a frequency to test. If this is enabled, it could be enabled or disabled, sorry. What this really is 162.400 as a default. That's the NOAA weather frequency. Now that is different in certain areas. I would make that a drop down, but I'll tell you why we're not going to do that. We support the UK now, so their values are completely different. We're actually going to add 2 more on here, so you can just have frequencies that you want to inject and report on. And somebody wrote to me, and it was a great idea. They want to put the 2 meter and 70 centimeter simplex call frequencies in there. So you'll be able to put those values in for that, and it will scan those. And then let's look at this, the gain. This is really 29.7. And the way we got these values is we played around with AirSpy's SDR Sharp. I was scanning on my HT, and I could pick up conversations. But when I went to SDR Sharp, with a really low, basically dB gain, I couldn't even hear it, So we adjusted these levels until it sort of works for everything. Now you might find that on a faraway repeater you need 40. That's a whole other topic, but we're going to allow you to eventually change these values here on the left, this SDR sampling and the SDR gain settings, per repeater. So if you want to take your SDR and plug in your favorite SDR software and figure out what those values are, we're going to eventually allow you to save those values per repeater, so you get super accurate scanning on each repeater individually. But that's a little ways off. But I wouldn't use automatic gain. And then our sample rate, it's pretty wide. Excuse me, it's Sunday night and I'm really tired. But that's it. The other things are, let's go back to here on the scheduling. Let's look at the scanner. We cover these values here. If you're going to play with these for whatever reason, turn this experimental mode on. That means the software is going to run just like it does when you're running it in real mode. It looks like it's sending up to the gray line fabric, but it's not really going to send that packet up, because you could set this, a minimum it's got to be 2, right? And this is going to be 4, and a near miss is 3. Literally reporting noise at that point up to the gray line fabric. So that's, like I said, we want to keep the data, because it's your data too. We want to keep this data accurate. So let's hit reset the scanner, and you can see it reset that back to the default values. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Oh, and log hits, we didn't talk about that. You know, when it's calibrating at the beginning, it prints out every single frequency that it's scanning and the values. If you turn log hits only off, it's going to do that all the time. Now that can be useful. Like if you're running your HT and you hear a conversation and like you're like, doggone it, AirPulse isn't picking that up. Why not? Well, you'll be able to see what we're receiving. And it might be really close to being reported, but it's just not strong enough. And that's where we get into the dB gain and setting values per repeater and all that stuff in the future. But that can be an interesting technique for you, but it will make your log file really big and it'll take up more memory. And I wouldn't want to let it run like that, for 8 hours straight. So if you put the log hits only, it's just going to log when it gets an active repeater. That's the way I have to run all the time unless you're playing around with things. And always remember to save your settings after you change them. But remember, if you get around in here and mess things up, you can always hit reset scanner and it'll load the faults that we ship with. Anyway, sorry for such a long video. I hope that made sense. Anyway, thanks everybody. It was a really super fun night watching all the activity on the map.